Hello everyone. In this chapter, we are going to cover the digestive system. The picture of the lady that you see on the picture here actually is experiencing a condition. That condition is called heartburn. Now, you've heard of heartburn, but when we talk about heartburn, are we really talking about the heart that is burning? The answer is no. But how is the heartburn associated with the digestive system? That's a story we are going to cover at some point. But as we cover this chapter, I want you to focus on a number of questions. One, it's what are the organs that make up the digestive system? Two, what is their structure? And what are their functions? Three, what enzymes are part of the digestive process? And where are these enzymes produced? Another question, it's what macromolecules are digested from the food we ingest. Say, for instance, you are eating a T-bone steak, right? What exactly is being broken down in the T-bone steak for your benefit, right? And then, what are the molecules that are absorbed by the body as nutrients? Finally, but not least, I want you to keep in mind the following question. What are some issues associated with the digestive system? Now, as you think about this question, this slide that you see here is actually going to be able to answer a number of these questions that we just asked and that I want you to keep in mind. One, it's that the digestive system is made up of main organs and accessory organs. The main organs are basically part of what we call the digestive tract. The digestive tract is going to start in the mouth, where food is going to be ingested. From there, digestion starts. The food is now going to move from the mouth to the pharynx area, from the pharynx area to the esophagus. From the esophagus, it goes in the stomach, from the stomach in the small intestine, from the small intestine, the large intestine, and finally, we are going to have the waste that is in the large intestine that is going to be stored in the rectum to be discarded through the anus. So that is the path that food is going to take as it goes through the digestion process. Now, obviously, some is going to benefit us. Whatever doesn't benefit us is going to be considered waste and be eliminated. Now, in addition to the digestive tract organs, we are going to have the accessory organs. While these organs are considered accessory, they play a very important role in digestion. We have the salivary glands that you find in the mouth. Then we're going to have the liver. In addition, we're going to have the gallbladder and the pancreas. Now, each organ that we just mentioned is playing a very specific role and they have a very specific structure. So in terms of structure, we are going to actually dive into a section of the digestive tract and see what are the different parts that make up the structure of the digestive tract. But before we go about that, let's define some terms. One, ingestion. Ingestion happens in the mouth. This is the intake of food via the mouth. There, digestion is going to start. There are two forms of digestion. We have mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. In any case, this digestion, it's a breakdown of the big chunks, consider, for instance, a T-bone steak that you would eat, right? It's a big chunk, right? That chunk has to be broken down physically first before it is broken down chemically. And eventually, the large molecules are going to be broken down into small building blocks. The small building blocks, the smallest, are the one your body is able to absorb and use as nutrients. Now, as you intake food in the mouth, that food goes through the digestive tract. For the food to move through the digestive tract, you absolutely need movement, and movement means the digestive tract will have to have muscles. Let me repeat that. Movement means the digestive tract will have to have muscles. All right? So, where do we find these muscles? We are going to address that in a minute. The muscles in the gastrointestinal tract, intestinal tract, right, are essential for the movement. Then, as the food is digested both mechanically and chemically, the nutrients are going to be absorbed, right? That absorption is going to carry the nutrients across the layer of the digestive tract, specifically across the epithelium in the small intestine and some level of large intestine, right? The nutrients are going to cross the epithelia and find themselves in the blood, where they are going to be carried to the remainder of the body. Whatever was not digested is going to be eliminated, right? That elimination occurs through the anus. Now, here we have the alimentary canal again, and showing the pathway. We mentioned earlier that the food is ingested through the mouth. From the mouth, the food is going to go in the esophagus. From the esophagus, it goes in the stomach. From the stomach, it goes in the small intestine that is extremely long. It's the longest organ of the digestive tract. And from the small intestine, we are going to have whatever was not digested is going to end up in the large intestine. And there is a part of the large intestine where actually the waste that is completely considered at that point waste is going to be stored. That part of the large intestine is called the rectum before that waste is eliminated through the anus. So that's the pathway of the food through the digestive tract. Now, let me say this. We call food anything that is on your plate for you to eat. Once it goes in your mouth and you start the mechanical and the chemical digestion process, at that point, what was food on your plate is not food anymore. That is going to carry different names. The substance is going to carry different names based on which area of the digestive tract that transformed food is going to be found in the body. We are going to address that. Now, let's take a look at a portion of the digestive tract and see the different components that make up a portion of the digestive tract. Now, if we consider where the actual digested food is going to be located, it's going to be located in an open space here that we call the lumen. That's where the digested food is going to be located. Now, going outward, so from the lumen going outward this way, right? We are going to meet the mucosa. The mucosa is actually a epithelium. That epithelium has a lot of cells that are called goblet cells. These goblet cells are actually producing the mucus, which causes a mucus layer to be in this area. Hence the name of mucosa, because that layer produces mucus, right? And then underneath of the mucosa, we are going to have the submucosa. The submucosa is going to be made up of loose connective tissue. In that loose connective tissue, we are going to find blood vessels, nervous tissue, the lymphatic vessels, and so on. And underneath of that submucosa, we are going to have the muscle layer. Notice that there are two muscle layers here. We have one muscle layer here, and we have another one muscle layer here. And notice that the muscle fibers are not running in the same direction, right? This is very strategic to make the structure strong. The muscle layers are called the muscularis. Two muscle layers in most of the digestive tract. The only difference we are going to see, it's going to be in the stomach that has actually 3 muscle layers instead of 2. And on top of the muscle layer, we are going to have right here the outermost layer that is called the serosa. The serosa, it's basically some other tissue that is going to wrap actually the digestive tract. We're going to have some blood vessels that are going to run in there. We're going to have some nervous tissue that is going to run in there. The lymphatic vessels that are also going to run in there, so that there is everything that is needed for this tissue to be nourished, to be innervated, for the movement, and so on and so forth. All right. So when we consider the structure of the wall that make up the digestive tract, so we have our digestive tract here. As we look at this, we have the mesentery. The mesentery is actually 2 membranes that are brought together. 2 membranes that are brought together to actually provide a protection to the arteries and veins, but also to connect segments of the digestive tract. Now, the digestive tract has to be folded so that it fits in a small space. But let me spare you all that discussion about all of that. So, again, we have the serosa. We're going to have the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis right here, right? We're going to have some muscles that are circular and others that are longitudinal, right? And again, the muscles, they don't run in the same direction. You have some muscle fibers that are going to run longitudinally. Others are going to run through a circular motion, right? So now, as we zoom on a small segment of the digestive tract, we are going to see the mucosa, the serosa, Then we're going to have the muscularis with the circular muscles and the longitudinal muscles. We're going to have the submucosa right here. And we are going to have the mucosa, that is all of this. The submucosa, it's all of this. All right? Now, notice that there are a number of blood vessels that are going to run from the submucosa to penetrating the mucosa. So we see the blood vessels going right underneath of the epithelium. Now, when we zoom in right here, we see actually some veins, arteries, or venules, and then we have the capillaries. So we have a capillary bed, right? And which means that, by the way, which means that these are arterioles and these are venules, all right? Now, along with the capillary bed, you are going to have some capillaries of the lymphatic system. These capillaries are called lacteals. Lacteals. I want you to remember that. And the last thing I want to mention is that the epithelium, it's a simple columnar epithelium almost throughout the digestive tract. Almost, not everywhere obviously, but most of it, right? The small intestine, the large intestine, it's all simple columnar epithelium. Now, beside epithelial cells, you are going to have some cells that are specialized in producing mucus and releasing that mucus. These cells are called goblet cells. I want you to remember the goblet cells and their role. Notice how the epithelial cells are elongated, right? And another thing that is worth mentioning too, it's that the epithelial cells on the top portion, you're going to have some little structures that look like little hair-like structures. These are the microvilli. These microvilli are there to actually increase the surface that is needed for the absorption of nutrients. I want you to remember that. So, what are the movements that take place in the digestive tube? We're going to have basically two types of movements. We're going to have the movement of mixing and the movement of propelling. Now, the movement of mixing is going to occur in small section, right? Small section that are going to contract rhythmically, right? Now, this motion is not actually moving the material in one direction. It's actually a type of movement that is called segmentation, okay? Segmentation. And then the other movement, the movement of propelling, is really what is going to move the food that is being digested along the digestive tract. So this type of movement is called peristalsis, right? Peristalsis. So you see here the stomach, right, with some food that is being digested in here, right? You have a number of movement here. You see the contraction of the stomach and also the movement in moving like this or like this, and then the section movement. So we have the segmentation movement and the peristalsis movement. I want you to remember those. So here we have the movement of the material as it goes from one location to another, right? So you do have the movement right here, and you have some other ways here to move the material along. Now, let's take a look at each of the organ. The first step we are going to make is in the mouth. In the mouth, we are going to have a number of organs, including the lips, the cheeks. We're going to have the teeth, right? We're going to have the palate. We have the soft palate and the hard palate. This is the hard palate right here. The soft palate is right here, the uvula. That's the soft palate, right? The end of the soft palate. We have the tongue. Okay. What else that is worth mentioning here? You are going to have the tonsils right here. Okay. We are going to take a look at the function of all of this. Now, when we look at the tongue actually has some teeny tiny structures. These teeny tiny structures allows us to taste different types of food, right? And these are the papillae. Okay, the papillae allows you to tell if the food is sweet, if it's sour, if it's bitter, and so on. Teeth are very important in chopping the food, right? Now, I'm not going to bug you with the details of the structure of the teeth, but I want you to remember a few things. One, the hardest part of the tooth is called the enamel. Right here, that's the hardest part of the tooth. That enamel is actually covering another part that is softer. That's the dentine. Okay? And underneath of the dentine, you are going to have the pulp. The pulp, it's actually where all the blood vessels and the nervous tissue, it's running to actually innervate the teeth and for you to be able to nourish the tooth. And the tooth is attached to the bones that make up basically part of your mouth, right? And the socket is called the alveolar process, right? So here we have, this is the process, the alveolar process, another alveolar process, right? And the tooth is sitting in there, and you have many fibrous proteins that are connecting the tooth, the root of the tooth, to the socket. All right, so the tooth can stay in place. Now, so I already say that in the inner part of the tooth, you have the pulp. This is where you're going to have the nerves and blood vessels. Now, sometimes when we don't take good care of our teeth, these teeth can actually decay. They decay because of excess acidity, right? That acidity is caused by bacteria that metabolize the sugar in our mouth and convert it into acids, and that acid attack the enamel that ultimately cause the fragilization of the enamel, and it breaks, and this is when you have dental caries and cavities. Now, going past the mouth, we are going to have the tongue. Okay, so we have the tongue here, huge muscle. We have the oral cavity right here. And in the back of the mouth, there is an area that I want to mention right here. That is the pharynx. The pharynx is divided into three parts. We have the nasopharynx, which is the area between the nasal cavity and the pharynx right here. Okay, so that's the nasopharynx. Then we have the oropharynx right here in the middle, the oropharynx. And then going down here, we have the laryngopharynx, the larynx, right? Which is part of your respiratory tract, right? But we are not going to address that. And the esophagus comes right behind the windpipe, okay? So this is your windpipe, okay? Also called the trachea. The esophagus is going to go right behind the windpipe. Now, about your teeth, there are two kinds of teeth that you are going to have. You have the primary teeth and the secondary teeth. The primary teeth are what we call the deciduous teeth. These are the teeth that you are going to lose at some point during your life, specifically when you are a child, right? And eventually, these teeth are going to be replaced by secondary teeth. These are permanent teeth, right? Now, I'm not going to actually bug you with the different kind of teeth. For instance, the incisors, the central, lateral, canine, molar. I'm not going to bug you with that, okay? I want you to remember, however, that you have, when you are still a child, you have 20 deciduous teeth. These are teeth that you're going to lose at some point, okay? And these deciduous teeth are going to be replaced progressively, right, by permanent teeth, okay? Now, by the time you have all your permanent teeth, you have 32 teeth. And again, I'm not going to bug you with the specificity here, right? I want you to remember that you have 16 teeth in the upper jaw and 16 teeth in the lower jaw. Now, different parts of the mouth, we're going to have the cheeks, okay? What is the job of the teeth? The teeth, their job is to hold food in the mouth. You have muscles in the teeth that are essential for chewing. Then we're going to have the lips. The lips are going to contain a bunch of sensory receptors. These are going to be essential for assessing the characteristics of the food, well, not just food, but also other things, right? Then we have the tongue. The tongue is going to be essential for mixing food with saliva. It's going to be essential for swallowing. Without your tongue, you won't know how to swallow, right? The tongue is going to push the food toward the back of the mouth, specifically in the pharynx area, right? The tongue is also going to contain taste buds, right? We talked about that. Then we have the palate, the palate. The palate is going to hold food in the mouth and direct the food to the pharynx. Now, you have, remember, the soft palate, right? That is going to actually prevent the food from going in the nasal cavity, right? And then you have the teeth. The teeth are going to be essential to mechanically break down the food. Again, teeth are going to be essential to mechanically break down the food. Teeth are not involved in chemical digestion of food, but in mechanical digestion of food, right? So it breaks it down into smaller chunks. Then, still in the mouth, we have the saliva. We have salivary glands. We have 3 pairs of salivary glands in the mouth. These salivary glands are going to release saliva. And saliva, it's a mix of enzymes, water, and salts, right? The enzymes that are found in the saliva are called amylases, salivary amylases, right? The salt that are very important in the saliva is the bicarbonate. Bicarbonate actually plays a very important role as it is a buffer, right? For instance, when you eat some food that is acidic, right? That acidity is going to be neutralized by the bicarbonate in the saliva, right? Amylases are enzymes that are specifically involved in breaking down macromolecules of sugars, specifically, for instance, starch, glycogen, right? They're going to break down starch into smaller molecules, glycogen into smaller molecules, and starch and glycogen are polysaccharides. I want you to remember that, okay? The saliva is there to moisten food, right? To actually cause food to become almost like a dough, right? And the water is going to be very important too for dissolving food, all right? So, the salivary gland, I told you that we do have 3 pairs of salivary glands, and these pairs of salivary glands are going to be the parotid gland right here. It's one set of salivary gland. We have the sublingual, the submandibular salivary gland and the sublingual salivary gland right here. Okay, so we have 3 sets of salivary glands. So the pharynx, I already told you about the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. I'm not going to come back to that. So all this area right here is the pharynx. Now, what is the swallowing process? Basically, when you put the food in your mouth, it is called food. You start chewing it, the saliva start releasing, the salivary gland start releasing some saliva. The food is going from a chunk that it was to a dough-like structure. That dough-like structure, food mass, it's not called anymore food, it's called bolus. It's called bolus. That bolus, it's going to be pushed by the tongue toward the back of the mouth. As the food goes toward the back of the mouth, you have 2 things that are going to happen. One is that the soft palate is going to lift up, preventing the food to going in the nasal cavity, which would be a bad news, right? 2, in the swallowing process, you have here an area that we call the epiglottis, right? The epiglottis will start a movement going down, right? So here, I'm taking you right here now. So the epiglottis goes down. By going down, the epiglottis is actually going to close the windpipe so that the food doesn't go toward the windpipe, right? You see the tongue here is pushing the bolus down, right? And then beyond that, the bolus finds itself in the esophagus. At that point, the movements are not voluntary anymore. Past the mouth, the movement of the bolus along the digestive tract is not voluntary anymore. It's now involuntary, right? So we're going to have some peristalsis movement that is going to cause the food to move downward from the esophagus to the stomach in here. That's the swallowing mechanism. Now, the esophagus, it's basically a passageway of the food. There is a particular area of the chest where the esophagus goes through. That part is called the hiatus, the esophageal hiatus. The esophageal hiatus, it's actually the little opening in the diaphragm, so here is the diaphragm right here, right? You have a little opening that allows the esophagus to go through so that it can go in the intestine, okay? Now, in the lower portion of the esophagus, we are going to have the cardiac sphincter. That cardiac sphincter actually is going to regulate the food that is in the stomach so that that food doesn't actually go back up. And when the food goes back up, this is when we have what we call acid reflux. That acid reflux is going to cause a burning feeling in the esophagus, and the area of the esophagus that is burning is right underneath of the heart. That's why we say heartburn. Nevertheless, the heart is not burning. So I told you that we are going to come back to that, right? The stomach. The stomach is actually the most musculous structure of the digestive tract. The stomach has 3 muscle layers, and these 3 muscle layers allows the stomach to actually do most of the mechanical digestion after the teeth, right? Because the teeth do a great mechanical digestion, no question about that. But after you swallow, the stomach is really what is going to do most of the job after that. So, some aspect I want to attract your attention upon here. The cardiac sphincter right here. And then we do have the pyloric sphincter right here. The pyloric sphincter, it's a ring of muscle at the bottom of the stomach that controls the movement of the food from the stomach to the small intestine. Now, let me correct something. You remember I told you that in the esophagus, the food is not called food anymore. It's called bolus, right? Now, in the stomach, the bolus is mixed with the gastric juice. As it is mixed with the gastric juice, the bolus is not a dough consistency anymore. It's now more fluid. That fluid, it's now called the chyme. Okay? That fluid is called the chyme. I want you to remember that. Okay? Now, when we consider the stomach, in terms of structure, I told you about the 3 muscle layers. I'm not going to come back to that again. I told you about the cardiac sphincter and the pyloric sphincter. Now, you have the lesser curvature that is toward the inside, and the greater curvature that is toward the bottom. The top part of the stomach is called the fundus, okay? And here you have some grooves and ridges, okay, that are called rugae. Groove and bridges that are ridges, that are called rugae, okay? Rugae, okay? So these are some terminologies you need to remember. Now, let's take a look at the gastric juice. The gastric juice contains a bunch of different things. You're going to have water. You're going to have some salts. You're going to have some enzymes. Now, let's be a little more specific here. You have one enzyme that is called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen, it's an enzyme that is inactive. When pepsinogen is activated, we don't call pepsinogen anymore pepsinogen. We call pepsinogen pepsin. Oops. We call it pepsin, right? And the job of pepsin is to break down proteins, okay? So, in other words, pepsins are proteases. They break down proteins, okay? I want you to remember that. Now, what activates pepsinogen to turn into pepsin? It's hydrochloric acid. That hydrochloric acid is released by some cells in the stomach, right? Now, what I did not say, it's that pepsinogen is produced by some cells in the stomach called chief cells, right? While hydrochloric acid, HCl, is produced by some cells in the stomach called parietal cells. The chief cells produce pepsinogen, while parietal cells are going to produce hydrochloric acid. Now, remember that along the digestive tract, you have the mucosa, right? Now, if you have the mucosa, that means you have the mucus. So that mucus is going to be produced by goblet cells, right? And those goblet cells are going to release that mucus that is made up of a viscous structure containing alkaline and protective chemical, right? This alkaline protective chemical are going to prevent the burning of the cells in the stomach, right? And then we are going to have some intrinsic factors, okay, that are released by parietal cells. These intrinsic factors are going to be, for instance, for the production of, for the absorption, of vitamin B12, okay, in the small intestine. All right. So, the lining of the stomach, remember the muscularis, 3 layers, okay? We're going to have the submucosa, and we're going to have the mucosa. Now, we're going to notice that we have what we call the gastric pit. That gastric pit is going to have, at the very bottom of the gastric pit, we're going to have the chief cells, okay? Remember, the chief cells produce pepsinogen, right? And then we're going to have the parietal cells. This parietal means wall, right? These are cells that are located along the wall, parietal wall, right? Okay? And we are going to have some gastric glands in here in the gastric pit, okay? And we're going to have cells that are releasing some mucus here. These are goblet cells. So here, you do have a micrograph of the stomach. All right. So I did tell you that when the bolus gets in the stomach, it mixes with the gastric juice. At that point, the bolus is not called bolus anymore. It's called chyme. I want you to remember that, okay? And that chyme is very acidic, right? So we're going to have some peristaltic movement and some segmentation movement that are going to occur there. You are going to have both sphincters, the cardiac sphincter and the pyloric sphincter, that are going to control the movement of the chyme from the stomach to the small intestine, okay? Because while the stomach is churning, you don't want the chyme to go upward or downward until it is ready to move downward, right? So when it's ready to move downward in the duodenum, you're going to have the pylori sphincter here that is going to relax. So I already told you about the heartburn, right? The heartburn is also called esophagitis. Esophagitis, right? That esophagitis is basically an inflammation of the walls of the esophagus because of what we call reflux of the chyme toward the esophagus. All right. So to prevent that, well, not to prevent that, but to relieve the heartburn, typically a person who is suffering of this condition is going to take antacids, right? So typically what would cause the heartburn, it's eating too much. Okay, eating too much is going to be a situation that is actually going to lead to heartburn. Okay, now how to prevent that? Obviously, you have to eat small meals. You have to swallow, you have to eat slowly, okay? And stay in an upright position for a good while. You have to avoid some type of drinks or food, like for instance, caffeine. It's a substance that actually can trigger heartburn. Nicotine and alcohol are all known to actually produce a heartburn. All right, now let's take a look at the pancreas. The pancreas, it's an organ that plays two roles. It's actually a gland as a whole. It's two types of glands at the same time. It's an endocrine gland and it's an exocrine gland. But what is the difference? An endocrine gland is going to release its content in the blood, and that content is going to travel and target some specific organs or cells. Now, the endocrine function of the pancreas is to release insulin that is involved in controlling the amount of sugar in the blood. The second hormone, insulin is a hormone, okay? The second hormone is glucagon. While insulin causes a decrease in the amount of sugar in the blood, glucagon is going to do the opposite. It's going to cause an increase in the amount of sugar in the blood. It's basically part of homeostasis, right? Then the other function is the exocrine function. The exocrine function means that the gland is going to release some substances, and these substances are going to act in their immediate surrounding. So the pancreas is going to release a content. That content is going to end up in the duodenum, which is part of the small intestine. And this content that is going to be released is actually called the pancreatic juice. Just like the gastric juice, the pancreatic juice is very complex. You have a bunch of enzymes in there. You have salt in there. You have different things, buffers in there. We are going to address that. So the pancreas, you see the pancreas here, which actually looks like basically like a corner, right? Okay. You're going to have the pancreatic ducts. The pancreatic ducts are going to take the pancreatic juice through here to the duodenum here, okay, where the content is going to be released in the duodenum, where much of the digestion is going to happen. All right. The pancreatic juice contains a bunch of enzymes. These enzymes are going to digest all kind of food. Now, remember that in the mouth, we did have the salivary the salivary amylases. The salivary amylases break down only polysaccharides, right? In the stomach, we talked about pepsinogens that turn into pepsins, right? These pepsins break down proteins. So you understand that so far, until you get in the small intestine, much of what has been digested chemically, it's carbohydrate and proteins. Now, because of the time the chyme is going to spend in the stomach, not all the digestion of protein can happen in the stomach. So it is going to actually happen in the small intestine. Now, let's take a look at the chemicals that are going to be digested. So you are going to have proteins that are going to be digested. You will have carbohydrates that get broken down in the small intestine. You're going to have lipids, the fats, and the nucleic acids. Bottom line, all the macromolecules of life are broken down in the small intestine because of the pancreatic juice. Now, what are the enzymes that are involved in here? We're going to have the pancreatic amylases. Just like the salivary amylases, the pancreatic amylases are going to break down polysaccharides, including starch and glycogen. These amylases are going to break down starch and glycogen into disaccharides. Now, let me remind you of the fact that glycogen is obtained from animal source of food. For instance, eating a steak, right? Eating an egg, okay? To name only those. While starch is obtained from type of food that comes from plants, including potatoes, rice, cassava, to name only those, okay? Then we are going to have, so these are the enzymes that are breaking down the polysaccharides. Then we're going to have the enzyme that break down lipids. These are pancreatic lipases. They're going to break down lipids, right? Specifically triglycerides. Not only triglyceride, because you also have other lipids. Then we're going to have trypsin. Trypsin is actually produced as trypsinogen. Trypsinogen is going to be activated and turned into trypsin, which is the form capable of digesting proteins, right? So, trypsin is actually activating another enzyme that is called chymotrypsin. Chymotrypsin is another enzyme that breaks down proteins, okay? And finally, another enzyme that breaks down protein is the carboxypeptidase. The carboxypeptidase actually are activated by trypsin, and they are going to break down proteins into peptides, okay? And eventually, these peptides are going to need to be broken down, which means you're going to need other enzymes that are called peptidases. However, we are not going to address the peptidases now. Then you have other enzymes that break down nucleic acids. These are the nucleases. The nucleases break down nucleic acid. Think about it. When, for instance, you eat chicken, what are you actually eating? You are eating chicken muscles, right? These chicken muscles are muscle cells, which means that they do have DNA. That DNA, it's nucleic acid. That nucleic acid is going to be broken down into nucleotide by nucleases. I want you to remember that, okay? And then you are going to have some buffer, bicarbonate ions. The bicarbonate ions are going to be responsible for causing the pancreatic juice, to be alkaline, okay? This is essential because the chyme that comes from the stomach is acidic, right? Remember, hydrochloride acid is produced in the stomach, so the chyme is acidic there. When it comes in the duodenum, right, that acidity has to be neutralized by bicarbonate, right? And the enzymes that work in the stomach and coming from the pancreatic juice are all active in a pH that is around neutral. They are not active in an acidic environment, right? That's why the chyme has to be neutralized. Then we have the liver. The liver is going to be essential for the production of bile salts. These bile salts are essential for the digestion of lipids. Remember, the lipids don't mingle with water. However, along the digestive tract, you have water everywhere, right? How does the body go about digesting lipids in this water-based environment? The lipids need to be emulsified, right? That emulsification is made possible because of the bile salts. But let's go back to that a little later. Let's take a look at the structure of the liver. The liver has 4 lobes. You have the right lobe, that is the largest, right? You have the left lobe, that is the smallest, okay? You have the quadrate lobe. That quadrate lobe, it's actually found along the gallbladder, where the gallbladder is located, okay? And then you have the caudate lobe, right by the inferior vena cava, right? Here is the inferior vena cava, okay? This is the caudate lobe, right? The quadrate lobe is right here, okay? Now, the liver is organized in lobules. These lobules are going to have cells that are going to be spread throughout. So now, you have a central vein right here, okay? Then you are going to have the the hepatic sinuses, okay? And in between, you are going to have liver cells. These are liver cells. These liver cells are the one that make bile salt. And you can find this little channels right here, this network, green. This network, it's the little channels through which the bile salt that are synthesized by liver cells are going to be released. So this bile salt eventually are going to end up in the bile duct, and the bile ducts are going to take the bile salt in the gallbladder where the bile salt are stored, right? So here we have an organization of the liver. This is a lobule, right? Okay. This is a graphic representation, while here you do have a micrograph. All right. So in here, you are going to have some particular cells, white blood cells specifically, that are essential to provide protection. These white blood cells that we call Kupffer cells are nothing but macrophages in the liver. Now, the monocyte differentiate into macrophages. Based on the part of the body, the macrophages are not always called macrophages. Okay? We call them different names. In the liver, they are called Kupffer cells. Okay? I want you to remember that, but they are macrophages. Now, what are the major functions of the liver? The liver is going to play a bunch of different roles, including synthesizing carbohydrates. Okay? So, as the food is digested, in the small intestine, you have an absorption of sugars from the small intestine to the blood. And from there, the glucose molecules are going to travel, and the first stop is going to be the liver. The liver is going to assess the amount of sugar in the blood. From there, the liver is going to say, okay, well, it looks like there is a lot of sugar in the blood. We have to internalize that sugar. When that sugar is internalized, it doesn't just stay like that. I mean, when I say sugar, I mean glucose. And when glucose is internalized, it actually goes and forms a macromolecule called glycogen. Okay? So there, glycogen is formed, but you also have glycogen that is broken down to release glucose molecules. Okay? So really, you don't only have synthesis of glycogen, you also have digestion of, the breakdown of glycogen by releasing single molecules of glucose for in case the body needs glucose in the blood. Then we have lipid metabolism. So in the liver, the fatty acids are oxidized, meaning that they are broken down, right? We have the synthesis still in the liver of lipoproteins. These are the proteins that are combined with lipids, okay? We have the phospholipids that are produced here. We have cholesterol, okay? And the carbohydrate here, when you have too much of it, it's going to be converted into fat, okay? Then you have protein metabolism. The liver actually does deamination of amino acid. That deamination is going to cause the production of urea. That urea is actually released in the urine. Okay? The liver also produces plasma proteins. You remember the plasma proteins from the previous module, right? we talked about the globulins, we talked about albumin, okay? And also in the liver, you have certain amino acids that are going to be converted into other amino acids, meaning that the liver actually really plays a very important role even in helping with protein synthesis. Now, they don't do protein synthesis, however, they produce the amino acids that are essential for protein synthesis, okay? The liver, it's an organ that is also used as a storage. It's going to store glycogen, the vitamins, including vitamin A, D, B12, also some iron, and the blood. The liver is also going to be able to filter blood, okay? It's going to remove damaged cells and foreign substances. And it is also going to be able to do detoxification, right? All the drugs that we take, say when you are sick and you are prescribed a drug, the liver is the one that does much of the detoxification that occurs in your system, okay? Detoxification. And also, it plays a role of secretion. Specifically, it's going to synthesize bile salt, right? And store this bile salt in the gallbladder. All right? Now, let's take a look at the bile salt. The bile salt, it's a mix of it's a mix of salt that are going to contribute in the digestion of lipid. Specifically, from cholesterol, some salt are going to be produced that are going to emulsify fat. And this fat that is emulsified is now in a form that can be soluble in a water-based environment so that the lipases can do their job, right? Now, in the bile, you're going to have water, okay? And you are also going to have some pigments, including bilirubin and biliverdin, which are byproduct of hemoglobin, right? Now, remember that the liver, it's actually one of the areas where blood is filtrated. Some blood cells actually die in the liver, and as the red blood cell die, the hemoglobin is broken down, okay? As the hemoglobin is broken down, you have production of bilirubin and biliverdin. This bilirubin and biliverdin are very characteristic in the sense that they produce a certain color, right? That color eventually is going to be found ultimately in the feces that causes the feces to have the color they have. But that's another story that we are going to cover at some point, right? In the bile, you also have cholesterol and electrolytes. Electrolytes are basically salts, okay? Now, there are some health conditions that are called hepatitis, okay? This hepatitis can be caused by many conditions, including viral infections, right? Hepatitis is typically inflammation of the liver, okay? Hepatitis can be acute, it can be chronic. The severity of hepatitis can vary from one condition to another, from one person to another. Most hepatitis are going to be caused by viruses, okay? That's why, by the way, you receive a vaccine against hepatitis, right? Now, whenever you have hepatitis, sometimes we go into exhibit symptoms, sometimes we're not going to exhibit symptoms, right? Some types of hepatitis is blood-borne. Others is actually food-borne, okay? Or body fluid, okay? Body fluid, including saliva, right? Can contain the virus and be passed around. Now, understand that antibiotics are not effective against viral hepatitis. Let me repeat that. Antibiotics are not effective against viral hepatitis. Okay? Hepatitis C, which is caused by the hepatitis virus C, okay, is one of the most common cause of hepatitis. Okay, now the gallbladder. The gallbladder right here is right underneath of the liver. That gallbladder is where the bile is stored, right? So we are going to have a cystic duct from the gallbladder that is actually going to join with a particular duct that is called the common hepatic duct. So right here, the common hepatic duct, okay? Common hepatic duct that actually takes the bile, okay, to the gallbladder. Okay, the hepatic duct takes the bile to the gallbladder. Okay, and eventually the gallbladder is going to empty its content, which is the bile, in the duodenum, where digestion is happening. And remember, the biles are involved in the digestion of lipids, right? So they're going to be there for emulsification of lipids. All right, the hepatic pancreatic sphincter is the one that regulates at which point the gallbladder is releasing the biles or not, right? When the sphincter relaxes, this is when the bile salts are released in the duodenum. All right, unfortunately, not everything is always good in the human. The gallbladder can experience some issues, particularly when we have a diet that is extremely rich in cholesterol, right? We can have what we call gallstones, okay? These gallstones are basically an accumulation of cholesterol particles that end up precipitating, right? And they become rock solid. And when I say rock solid, it is rock solid, right? This crystal, once they start forming, they never shrink. They only grow, right? And that's why some people, because of the gallstones, have to undergo a surgery. Because once the stones start developing, they don't shrink, they only grow, and that can be a problem over a long term. Okay? So the function of the bile salt, it's for emulsification of lipids, right? It allows the breakdown of lipids by lipases. Without that emulsification, forget about breaking down the lipids, right? The bile salts are also essential for absorption of fatty acids, right, and cholesterol. And that absorption is going to basically take the fatty acid and cholesterol to the body, where it is going to benefit the body. The bile salt also helps a lot for absorption of non-water soluble vitamins, including vitamins A, it's not soluble in water, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. Okay? The good news is that almost all bile salts are recycled, which allows the body to not have to synthesize bile salt all the time. So that is a relatively a good news. The gallbladder disease, some symptoms are going to be the pain in the upper right abdominal quadrant, because this is kind of where the gallbladder is located, right? The pain can radiate right back the shoulder. Sometimes there could be nausea or sweating or both, right? How can we know that there is a gallbladder disease? Typically, ultrasound, okay? It's what is going to allow us to know if the gallstones are there or not. X-ray, right? These exams are also called cholecystograms. Cholecystograms. Now, sometimes because of the gallstones, you have to experience a surgery. That surgery actually is the cholecystectomy. Cholecystectomy, okay? And we can see the stone using endoscopy. All right? All right, so at this point, we are going to dive in the small intestine. But before we dive in the small intestine, let us take a quick pause here.